There's a very specific kind of stupidity that only comes alive in front of other people. Private stupidity is one thing. That's just a bad decision in sweatpants. But public stupidity? Public stupidity puts on a show. It needs a crowd, a camera, a few drunk friends, or at the very least, one person dumb enough to say, "No way, bro, do it." That's the kind we're dealing with tonight. These are not accidents. Accidents are when something goes wrong. These are 10 fully committed live performances where the need to look impressive steamrolled the human survival instinct like it owed money. Every story on this list starts the same way. One person has an idea, a few witnesses make it worse, and physics patiently waits off stage like a hitman with perfect timing. So tonight, we're opening the case files on 10 people who didn't just make bad choices, they turned those choices into public events. Tiny little talent shows for natural selection. And we begin with a man who decided that if you're drunk enough, a horse is basically just a more American Uber. 1. The drive-thru cowboy. The late-night drive-thru is usually a place for quiet shame, a fluorescent sanctuary where people in sweatpants buy 2,000 calories of regret and avoid eye contact with the cashier. It is not, generally speaking, a place where history is made. Unless you are very drunk, and very stupid, and in possession of a horse. Our first contestant was a rural thrill-seeker whose name history has graciously blurred, which is probably the kindest thing that ever happened to him. It was just after 2 o'clock in the morning, and he was operating under the kind of alcohol saturation usually associated with field hospitals and country songs. Somewhere between several bourbons and a complete system failure of judgment, he accepted a party dare that a sober brain would have flagged as suicidal nonsense. His mission was simple. Ride a horse through a fast food drive-thru to buy a cheeseburger. Now, on paper, this is already a bad plan, but it gets worse, because he was not riding some hardened police horse trained to tolerate sirens, traffic, and human chaos. He saddled up a deeply sheltered barn horse whose life experience consisted mostly of quiet fields, fence posts, and the occasional emotionally challenging squirrel. From the horse's perspective, the modern city was not civilization, it was hell. Bright lights, roaring engines, hot pavement, neon reflections, strange smells, metal boxes screaming past in every direction. Every instinct in that animal's body was saying the same thing: leave, immediately. But our cowboy, swaying with the confidence of a man who had fully outsourced his decision-making to whiskey, guided the terrified animal into the narrow concrete canyon of the drive-thru lane. The poor horse was already one nervous breakdown away from orbit when they approached the ordering station. And then came the trigger, the speaker box. Now, fast food intercom systems do not sound human. They sound like a demon trapped in a microwave. There's always that violent burst of static first, like the machine is loading your shame into a database, and then a loud, disembodied voice suddenly tears into the night asking if you want fries. The second that speaker crackled to life, the horse's soul left its body. It reared straight up in full prey animal panic, trying to violently uninstall itself from the entire situation. The rider, whose blood alcohol level had reduced his core strength to decorative levels, was instantly launched backward out of the saddle. And this is where architecture entered the story. Drive-thru lanes are lined with steel security bollards filled with concrete. They exist to stop cars from slamming into the building, which means they are incredibly effective at not moving when a drunk man's skull introduces itself at speed. He flew backward through the humid night air and met one of those immovable posts with a final, emphatic demonstration of why horse-based fast food transport never really caught on in modern urban planning. The horse, having correctly identified the entire city as a death maze, fled into the darkness and survived. The rider did not. He died exactly where he made his last order, becoming the only man in fast food history to get permanently parked at the speaker box. And all because he failed to understand one very important truth. A terrified farm animal is the absolute worst delivery vehicle in American dining. 2. The human washing machine. There is a very dangerous stage of drunken boredom where the human brain stops asking, "Is this a good idea?" and starts asking, "I wonder what this button does." That's where this story begins. Two friends, late at night, deeply intoxicated, wandering through an abandoned industrial laundry facility like it was an amusement park with bad lighting and zero supervision. Now, an empty warehouse at night already feels like a place where something bad is supposed to happen. But these two weren't scared. They were curious. And curiosity, when combined with alcohol and machinery you don't understand, becomes something much more dangerous. It becomes experimentation. They move through the dark using their phone flashlights, laughing, kicking things, opening doors that absolutely should have stayed closed. And eventually, they found it. The machine. An industrial water extractor. To a normal person, this is clearly heavy-duty equipment designed for a very specific purpose, spinning massive loads of soaked fabric at extremely high speeds to remove water using centrifugal force. To these two idiots, it was a ride. A giant steel drum, big enough to fit a person, with a control panel that was still lit, which, in their minds, meant one thing: it still works. Now, this is the moment where a functioning brain would stop, because when a machine is large, sealed, and powered, and you don't know what it does, you leave. But that's not what happened. One of them had an idea, the worst kind. I'm gonna get inside. And instead of stopping him, his friend did something much more dangerous. He supported the idea. Because every terrible decision needs a second person to say, yeah, do it. The volunteer test subject climbed into the drum, laughing, treating it like a carnival ride. Cold steel walls, confined space, no exit from the inside. But none of that registered, because in his mind, this was about to be fun. On the outside, his friend stood at the control panel, a panel filled with buttons he did not understand, which is exactly the kind of panel people like this love pressing. He started hitting switches, one after another, until something happened. A deep mechanical hum, low at first, then louder. The machine came to life. And then came the sound that should have ended everything immediately. The door locked. Not gently, not politely. A heavy, aggressive metal clank. The kind of sound that says, "You're not getting out." But instead of panic, they laughed. Because they still thought this was a ride. And then the drum started spinning. Slowly at first, just enough to feel it. Inside, the guy braced himself, still smiling, still thinking he was about to have a story to tell. Then the machine accelerated. And this is where physics entered the conversation. Industrial extractors are not designed for comfort. They are designed for efficiency. They don't spin like a washing machine. They spin like a centrifuge. Which means they don't build gently. They go from, "this is fine," to, "this is a mistake," almost instantly. Inside the drum, the human body, soft, unreinforced, full of organs suspended in fluid, was suddenly introduced to forces it was never meant to experience. The rotation increased, the speed climbed, and in a matter of seconds, the joke ended. Because centrifugal force doesn't negotiate. It pinned him against the steel wall with overwhelming pressure. Breathing became difficult, then impossible. His body was no longer functioning as a system. It was being redistributed. Outside, his friend finally realized something was wrong. The laughter stopped. He rushed to the controls, suddenly very aware that he had absolutely no idea how to stop what he had just started. Buttons were pressed. Nothing happened. The machine screamed at full speed, doing exactly what it was built to do. By the time he found the emergency stop, it didn't matter. The ride had already finished. Silence returned to the warehouse. Heavy. Permanent. The kind of silence that only exists after something irreversible. The coroner later had to explain a scenario that sounds like it was written as a joke. A man entered a commercial laundry machine and experienced astronaut-level centrifugal force without the astronaut, without the training, without the survival. All because two people looked at industrial equipment and saw entertainment. 3. The Cliff Unicycle Genius. There's a very specific personality type that believes balance equals intelligence. If you can stand on one wheel, ride a slack line, or juggle while making eye contact, you start to think you've unlocked something deeper about the universe. You haven't. You've just convinced yourself that gravity is negotiable. Meet Daniel. Daniel was not just a unicyclist. He was a unicyclist with a philosophy. His social media bio read like a motivational poster written by someone who had never lost an argument with himself. Balance is mastery. Fear is illusion. Limits are lies. Which is a very inspiring mindset, right up until you apply it to cliffs. Daniel had spent years building a reputation online riding his unicycle in increasingly dramatic places. City rails, rooftops, narrow bridges. Every video the same formula. A slow pan, a deep breath. A man who believed he was one bad decision away from greatness. And the algorithm rewarded him. Views went up, followers climbed, comments filled with, "Legend, insane balance, bro. You're built different." And here's the problem with that kind of feedback. Eventually, you have to prove them right. So Daniel went looking for his masterpiece, and he found it. A coastal cliff, windy, narrow, beautiful, and most importantly, stupidly dangerous. We're talking about a ledge maybe 2 feet wide, carved into the side of a cliff that drops straight down into the ocean like nature's own unsubscribe button. No rails, no safety gear, no margin for error. Just rock, wind, and consequences. To a normal person, this is a place you stand still, take a photo, and leave. To Daniel, this was content. He set up his camera, checked the angle, adjusted the framing so the drop looked even more dramatic. Because if you're risking your life, you might as well get good lighting. Before starting, he looked into the lens and delivered his usual calm, enlightened tone. People think balance is physical. It's mental. Which is true, but falling is very physical. He mounted the unicycle. One smooth motion. Years of practice showing. He began to ride along the edge. Slow. Controlled. Perfect. And for a moment, he was right. He looked untouchable. The wind moved around him, but he adapted. The terrain shifted slightly, but he corrected. Every micro-adjustment a demonstration of skill. Back at home, future viewers would watch this part and think, okay, maybe he actually knows what he's doing. Daniel probably thought the same thing. And that's when things go wrong. Because confidence doesn't kill you at the beginning. It kills you right after you start believing you're in control. A sudden gust of wind came off the ocean. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just real, unpredictable. The kind of wind that doesn't care about your philosophy. The wheel wobbled, just slightly, a small correction. Normally that's nothing, but on a ledge that narrow, that's everything. His body leaned, instinctively, the wrong direction. The tire slipped on loose gravel. And here's the part nobody thinks about. When you fall on flat ground, you fall down. When you fall on a cliff, you disappear. There was no dramatic scream, no slow-motion hero moment, just a sudden absence. The camera kept rolling, capturing the empty ledge, the ocean below, and the sound of wind moving through a space that, seconds ago, had a man in it. Rescue teams later recovered the footage, and for once, the comment section got quiet. Because there's something deeply uncomfortable about watching someone who truly believed they had mastered risk lose to something as simple as a gust of wind. Daniel's followers called him fearless, but fear exists for a reason. It's not weakness, it's information. And Daniel ignored it, because he thought balance was enough. Turns out, gravity doesn't care how centered you feel. 4. The elevator dare. There's a universal rule in America. If something says, "do not enter," someone will absolutely try to enter it. Not because they have to, not because it makes sense, but because somewhere deep inside the human brain, there's a voice that whispers, "Yeah, but what if I'm the exception?" Meet Kyle. Kyle was what you'd call socially competitive. Not successful, not particularly talented, but extremely committed to never looking like the least impressive guy in the room. And on this particular Friday night, the room was a half-empty apartment building lobby filled with cheap beer, loud opinions, and exactly 0 good decisions. Someone, no one remembers who, noticed the elevator was out of order. The doors were open. Inside, a dark shaft. A maintenance sign hanging casually like a suggestion. Elevator out of service. To a normal person, that sign means, use the stairs. To Kyle, after 3 beers and a bruised ego, it meant opportunity. Because 5 minutes earlier, someone had made the fatal mistake of saying, "Dude, I bet you wouldn't even step in there." And that's all it takes, that one sentence, the spark that turns a functioning adult into a case study. Kyle laughed, that exaggerated, confident laugh people use when they're about to do something incredibly stupid. Step in? Bro, I could ride that thing down. Let's pause here, because there is no version of reality where riding a broken elevator manually into a dark shaft is a good idea. Elevators are not ladders, they are not playground equipment, and they are definitely not designed for drunk improvisation. But Kyle wasn't operating on reality, he was operating on audience energy. Phones came out, someone hit record, and just like that, this stopped being a bad idea and became a performance. Kyle stepped inside. The floor of the elevator car was stuck slightly above the lobby level, maybe 2 feet, not much, just enough to make it feel manageable. He grabbed the inner railing, turned back to his friends, and smiled like a man who believed this would end in applause. "I'm just gonna lower it a bit," he said, which is not a sentence anyone qualified has ever said about an elevator. What Kyle didn't understand, and didn't care to understand, is that elevators don't just sit there. They are held in place by complex braking systems, counterweights, and tension mechanisms. Systems that assume you are not inside messing with them. He shifted his weight. The car creaked. A subtle sound, but important. The kind of sound that, in horror movies, means leave immediately. Kyle heard it, ignored it, because the crowd was still watching. He bounced slightly, testing it. The car dropped an inch. Laughter behind him. Encouragement. And now he had a problem. He couldn't stop. Because stopping would mean admitting this was stupid. So he committed. One more push. One more shift. And that's when the system decided it was done negotiating. The brake slipped. Not dramatically, not explosively, just enough. The elevator car dropped suddenly, a short, violent lurch downward. Kyle lost his footing instantly, hands scrambling, trying to grab anything. But elevators are designed to be smooth. There's nothing to hold. No safety rail for this. No second chance. He fell. Half in, half out. The worst possible position. Because now, the machine that was supposed to carry people safely between floors became something else entirely. The gap closed. Fast. Mechanical. Unfeeling. The phones kept recording, because no one processes reality that quickly anymore. At first, it looked like part of the stunt, like he'd planned it, like this was the payoff. And then, the screaming started. Not from Kyle, from everyone else. Because in that exact moment, the performance ended, and reality took over. Emergency services arrived minutes later. But minutes are a very long time when you're dealing with machinery that doesn't make mistakes. Only people do. The building manager later said the elevator had been shut down earlier that day due to a brake fault. Which means Kyle didn't just ignore a warning. He walked directly into a known problem and tried to outconfidence it. The video never got posted. But it didn't need to, because everyone who was there learned the lesson in real time. Some systems don't care how brave you are. They don't care how confident you feel. They don't care if people are watching. They're built on rules, and those rules don't bend for ego. Kyle wanted to prove he wasn't afraid, and he succeeded. Right up until the moment, fear would have been useful. 5. The ice bath influencer. There's a modern belief that refuses to die. If something looks painful on camera, it must be good for you. Cold plunges, ice baths, mental toughness. Somewhere along the way, discomfort stopped being a signal and became a brand. Enter Chad, or more specifically, Iceman Chad. A man whose entire personality was built on convincing strangers on the internet that suffering equals superiority. His content was simple. Wake up early, say something vaguely philosophical, do something aggressively uncomfortable. Call it discipline. And it worked. Followers climbed. Comments flooded in. Stay hard. You're built different. This is what separates men from boys, which is ironic, because biology doesn't care about your followers. Chad's latest idea? Break the unofficial internet record for longest ice bath, live on stream. Because if you're going to slowly shut down your body, you might as well monetize it. He spent hours setting it up. A steel tub in his backyard, hundreds of pounds of ice. Water cold enough to make a polar bear reconsider its life choices. Camera positioned perfectly, lighting clean, branding visible, because even hypothermia should be aesthetically pleasing. He stepped into frame wearing nothing but shorts and confidence. Today, he said, smiling into the camera, we prove that the mind controls everything. The chat exploded. Fire emojis, hype messages, people cheering for a man actively negotiating with thermodynamics. He lowered himself into the water, and immediately, his body disagreed with his philosophy. The initial shock hit like electricity, a full-body panic response, gasp reflex, heart rate spike, skin turning red in seconds. To a normal person, that's the signal to get out. To Chad, that was the intro. "Let's go!" he shouted through clenched teeth. "Mind over matter." And for the first few minutes, it looked impressive. Controlled breathing, forced calm, the illusion of dominance. But here's the problem with trying to dominate nature. Nature doesn't compete. It just waits. 10 minutes in, the shaking started. Violent, uncontrollable. His muscles spasming as his body burned energy trying to stay alive. To the audience, it looked intense. To any doctor, it looked like a warning. A loud one. But Chad smiled through it. "This is where most people quit," he said, voice trembling. "They're weak." No, they're listening. His speech began to slow, words slightly off, thoughts taking longer to form. Because his brain, which runs on heat and oxygen, was starting to lose both. And then something dangerous happened. The shaking stopped. Now, if you don't know what that means, it looks like progress, like control, like victory. Chad thought so too. A weak smile spread across his face. "I told you," he mumbled. "You can train your body." He couldn't finish the sentence, because the body he thought he controlled had just stopped trying. This is the part no influencer explains. When shivering stops, it doesn't mean you've adapted. It means your system is failing. Core temperature dropping, heart rhythm destabilizing, brain shutting down non-essential functions, like consciousness. Chad blinked slowly, eyes unfocused, still smiling, still trying to perform, even as his body exited the conversation. And then, he just slumped. Quietly, no drama, no big moment, just a slow collapse into the water he thought he had conquered. The live stream kept running. The chat didn't understand. At first. "Bro? Is this part of it?" "Legend." And then the tone shifted. "Wait. Yo, get him out. Call someone." Emergency responders arrived too late, because hypothermia doesn't look urgent until it is. Chad's final stream was clipped, reposted, analyzed. Millions of views. The most engagement he'd ever had. Which is the cruelest part of all. He finally went viral, just not in the way he planned. His followers said he died doing what he loved, but that's not really true. He died proving something, that your mind is powerful, but it is not in charge. You can ignore pain, you can override discomfort, you can push past limits, but you cannot negotiate with biology, and you definitely can't live stream your way out of it. 6. The Backyard NASA Program. There are two kinds of people in America. People who see a cartoon and laugh, and people who see a cartoon and think, yeah, I could build that. Kevin was the second kind. Kevin didn't believe in limits. He believed in projects. Specifically, projects that start with, "Dude, hear me out," and end with, "Local news helicopters." On this particular weekend, Kevin and his friends had gathered in a backyard that had already seen too many bad ideas survive longer than they should have. Cheap beer, power tools, zero supervision. The holy trinity of bad engineering. The inspiration? A cartoon. A human slingshot. Because nothing in human history has ever gone wrong when someone tries to recreate physics from animation. Their plan was simple, which is always the first red flag. 2 telephone poles, buried into the ground. Not professionally, just committed. Between them, 100 feet of industrial surgical tubing, the kind designed for controlled environments, not for launching a grown man into the sky like expired produce. And the payload? Kevin. Of course, because the guy with the idea is never the one holding the camera. Kevin climbed into the launch vehicle, which was, for reasons no one questioned, an inflatable kiddie pool shaped like a smiling frog. Helmet on, confidence maxed out. Brain, optional. The target? A lake, 300 yards away, which sounds impressive until you realize distance is only half the equation. The other half is where you land. But Kevin and his team had already solved that, using a highly advanced calculation method known as, yeah, that looks about right. They pulled the tubing back using a forklift, because when you don't understand force, you outsource it. The band stretched, tighter, tighter, groaning under the kind of tension that makes engineers uncomfortable and idiots excited. The air changed. That weird silence right before something irreversible happens. Kevin looked at the camera, smiling like a man about to invent regret. Tell NASA I'm coming for them. And that right there was the last intelligent sentence anyone expected from this situation. The release mechanism, a welded hook that had absolutely no business being trusted, snapped free. And just like that, Kevin became a projectile. The launch was perfect. Beautiful even. He shot into the sky in a clean arc, high, fast. For a moment, he was right. He looked like a human rocket, a backyard astronaut, proof that confidence and poor planning can sometimes produce impressive results. His friends screamed, cheered. One guy dropped his beer, because for that 1 second, it felt like success. And then, physics checked the math. Because while Kevin and his team had calculated distance, they had completely ignored altitude. And more importantly, they had ignored the massive oak tree directly between them and the lake. You know, the one that had been there the entire time. The one nobody thought to include in the plan. Kevin reached the apex of his flight, that quiet moment at the top, where everything slows down, where realization finally catches up. And that's when he saw it. Not the lake, not glory, just bark. A lot of bark. And no way around it. There's no steering in a slingshot, no brakes, no second attempts, just momentum and consequences. He hit the tree with the force of a small car accident. The sound, not cinematic, not dramatic, just final. The frog-shaped vessel did not survive re-entry. Neither did the mission. The backyard went silent. Because nothing kills excitement faster than reality arriving on time. Emergency services were called. Statements were made. Words like tragic accident were used, which is technically correct. But let's be honest, this wasn't an accident. This was a group project, with zero research, and one very committed volunteer. The video? Never uploaded. But it didn't need to be, because everyone there learned something important. Cartoons don't follow physics. You do. Kevin wanted to be remembered, and he was, just not by NASA. 7. The pufferfish taste test. There's a dangerous kind of confidence that comes from knowing just enough to be completely wrong. Not expert-level wrong, not confused, but confidently, publicly, aggressively wrong. Greg lived there. Greg was the kind of guy who didn't just have opinions, he announced them, loudly, with the tone of a man who had never once been corrected by reality. And on this particular beach vacation, Greg found his moment. A shallow tide pool, clear water, small fish, and right in the middle of it, a pufferfish, fully puffed, spiky, looking like nature's version of a warning label. Greg's family stood back, admiring it the way normal people admire things that might kill them, from a safe distance. But Greg saw an opportunity, Not danger, not risk, but a chance. To educate. Relax, he said, stepping forward like a man about to win an argument no one started. That thing's harmless. Let's pause, because this is where the universe usually gives you a chance to walk away. A moment, a warning, a choice. Greg ignored all of it, because somewhere in his brain there was a memory, half-formed, probably from a documentary he didn't finish. Pufferfish are only dangerous if you eat them, which is technically true, in the same way that saying, guns are only dangerous if you pull the trigger is technically true. But context matters, and Greg did not do context. He grabbed a stick, poked the fish. It puffed up even more, spines extended, body tense. Every signal screaming, do not interact with this. Greg smiled, because to him, this wasn't a warning. It was a challenge. You see, he said, turning back to his family, it's just scared. Which is correct. It was scared. Of him. Because evolution had spent millions of years designing that fish to survive predators. And then Greg showed up. A man with no natural defenses and infinite confidence. His kids started backing away. His wife said something along the lines of, Greg, stop. But Greg had already crossed the most dangerous line. He had an audience. And once you have an audience, you can't back down, not without losing the imaginary argument in your head. So he escalated. Of course he did, because when you're wrong, you don't stop. You double down. He reached into the water, picked up the fish, held it in his hand like a prop, like something he owned. This whole poison thing, he said, shaking his head, overblown. Now here's the part where nature gives you one last exit, a final chance, a moment to put the fish down and pretend this never happened. Greg didn't take it. Instead, he leaned in and said the sentence that should disqualify you from decision-making for life. I'll prove it. And then, he licked it. Not quickly, not accidentally, a full, deliberate, committed lick, like he was tasting ice cream. And in that exact moment, Greg turned himself into a case study. Because what Greg didn't know, what Greg never bothered to know, is that pufferfish don't just store toxin inside, they secrete it, through their skin, as a defense mechanism. Meaning Greg had just done something incredible. He bypassed every survival instinct and directly applied one of the most potent neurotoxins in nature to his own body, voluntarily. The effect was immediate. At first, numbness, lips, tongue, that strange tingling feeling people laugh about. Greg laughed. Of course he did. Because the worst part of being wrong is realizing it too late. See, he said, voice slightly off now. Told you. His words started to blur. His face changed. That slow shift from confidence to confusion. Because his body had already started shutting down systems. Tetrodotoxin doesn't mess around. It doesn't warn you. It doesn't negotiate. It just turns off signals. Muscles stopped responding. Breathing became harder. Not dramatic, just weaker. Like someone slowly turning down a switch. Greg tried to speak again. Couldn't. Tried to move. Didn't work. And now, for the first time in this entire story, Greg understood something. He was not in control. He collapsed, right there on the beach, in front of the same audience he had been performing for. But this time, no one was clapping. Because this wasn't a demonstration anymore. This was biology, correcting misinformation. Emergency services were called, but tetrodotoxin works fast, efficient, precise. The kind of efficiency Greg would have respected, if he had survived long enough to understand it. Later reports would call it a tragic accident. But again, let's be honest, this wasn't an accident. This was a man who thought confidence could replace knowledge, and for a brief moment, it looked like he was right. Until nature responded. Greg wanted to prove the danger wasn't real, and he did, just not in the way he expected. 8. The Fire Hose Challenge. Every town in America has one, that one guy. The guy who thinks strength equals invincibility and alcohol equals good judgment. Barry was that guy. Barry wasn't necessarily stupid, he was just aggressively confident in the wrong situations. You know the type. Bench presses twice a week, talks about it every day, believes physics is just a suggestion for people who don't train. So when the local fire department hosted an open house, families, kids, safety demos, Barry didn't see a community event. He saw a stage, because nothing attracts Barry faster than a crowd, a challenge, a chance to prove something nobody asked for. And right in the center of it all was the fire hose. Not a normal hose, a deck gun. Mounted on the truck, capable of blasting water with enough force to knock down walls. To everyone else, it was impressive. To Barry, it was personal. A firefighter demonstrated it. A controlled blast of water shooting across the parking lot like a liquid battering ram. Kids clapped. Parents filmed. Normal reactions. Barry squinted, crossed his arms, and said the sentence that should legally require supervision. That's it? You could feel it, that shift in the air, the moment when a bad idea starts forming. Because now, Barry had a narrative. In his head, this wasn't equipment. This was a test, and he was about to pass it. He walked up to the firefighters, chest out, voice loud, performing. "I bet I could take that," he said. Now, to be fair, the firefighters did exactly what trained professionals are supposed to do. They said no. Immediately, repeatedly, clearly. Explain the pressure. Explain the force. Explain that this is not a toy. Barry heard all of that and translated it into, they're scared. Because once you decide you're the strongest person in the room, any warning sounds like insecurity. A small crowd started forming. Phones came out. Because once again, this stopped being reality and became content. Barry leaned into it, flexed, turned slightly so the light hit his arms better. "I won't even move," he said. And right there, that sentence was the point of no return. Because now he had something to prove. Not to the firefighters, not to physics, but to the audience. The fire captain hesitated, then finally agreed to a very low pressure test. Important detail. This was them trying to make it safe. Barry thought it meant he had already won. He walked out into the open space, planted his feet, wide stance, like a man about to hold back the ocean. He pointed at his chest, right here, smiling, confident, certain. The nozzle turned, the water lined up, and for a split second, everything paused. Because reality always gives you one last moment, a tiny window where you can step back. Barry didn't. The firefighter squeezed the handle, the water hit, and immediately, Barry learned the difference between theory and force. Because even at reduced pressure, a fire hose doesn't push. It hits. Hard. A solid, uninterrupted column of water moving faster than your brain can process. For half a second, Barry didn't move, and that was the worst part. Because in that half second, he thought he was right. His face locked in that "see" expression, that tiny moment of victory. And then, he wasn't standing anymore. The force lifted him, clean, off his feet, like he weighed nothing. Because to physics, he didn't. He became a projectile, launched backward across wet asphalt. No control, no balance, no second chance. And then, impact. The back of his head hit the steel bumper of the fire truck, a sound that cut through the crowd instantly. Not loud, just final. Silence. Phones lowered. No cheering, no laughter. Just that sudden, uncomfortable shift when everyone realizes this wasn't supposed to go like this. Emergency responders moved fast, because unlike Barry, they understood what had just happened. Later, reports would say, severe blunt force trauma, which is a very clinical way of saying, he challenged something that was never designed to lose. The firefighters returned to their jobs. The equipment was shut down. The crowd dispersed. And somewhere in that quiet aftermath, a very simple truth settled in. Strength is impressive. Confidence is attractive. But neither of those things matter when you're standing in front of a machine built to overpower everything in its path. Barry wanted to prove he wouldn't move, and for a moment, he didn't. Right up until the moment, he went exactly where physics decided he should. 9. The smart home genius. There's a certain kind of intelligence that's actually just confidence in disguise. You see it a lot in tech. A guy builds one thing that works and suddenly decides he understands everything. Meet Derek. Derek wasn't just a tech enthusiast. He was what you'd call a systems guy. The kind of person who says things like, "I optimized it. I removed unnecessary constraints. I built it better than the original." Which is a very impressive mindset, until the constraints you remove are the ones keeping you alive. Derek's masterpiece was his garage. Not the house, not the kitchen, just the garage. Because that's where innovation happens. He had built his own custom smart system. Lights, cameras, sensors, everything connected, everything controlled from his phone. And at the center of it all, his pride and joy, a custom-coded garage door app. Now, a normal garage door has safety features, sensors that stop it if something is underneath, auto-reverse mechanisms, pressure detection, basic survival tools. Derek removed all of them, because in his words, they're inefficient. Of course they are. So are seatbelts, until they're not. He had rewritten the system, full manual control, no delays, no interruptions, just pure, immediate response. In Derek's mind, this wasn't dangerous, this was power. And like every man who builds something dangerous, he needed someone to show it to. Enter Dave, the neighbor. A simple man, not an engineer, not a programmer, but in possession of one very important thing: common sense. Derek walked him into the garage like a tour guide showing off a luxury resort. "Watch this," he said, holding up his phone. "The future." Dave looked at the heavy metal garage door, looked at Derek, and asked the only correct question. "Is that safe?" Derek laughed. Not a nervous laugh, a condescending one. The kind that says, "You don't understand what I've built." "Safe," he said. "It's perfectly safe. I have total control." And right there, that sentence was the entire problem. Because nothing is more dangerous than a person who believes they are the safety system. Derek wanted to demonstrate precision, control, dominance over his own creation, so he came up with a test. Not a smart one, not a necessary one, but a dramatic one. Because again, there was an audience. He lay down, flat, on the concrete floor, directly under the garage door. Hands behind his head, relaxed, like a man about to prove a point. Dave immediately stepped back, because Dave understood something Derek didn't. If you have to demonstrate safety like this, it's not safe. Derek raised his phone, thumb hovering over the button. "Watch," he said. "I'll close it right to my chest and stop it instantly." Now, let's break this down. He had removed all safety features, relied entirely on software, added human reaction time, and introduced a single point of failure, his phone. What could go wrong? He pressed the button. The door started moving, smooth, controlled, descending slowly. The shadow crept down his body, chest, stomach, closer, closer. Derek smiled, because everything was working, exactly as expected. "See?" he said. "Perfect control." And then, his phone lagged. Not dramatically, not obviously, just a tiny delay, a fraction of a second. The kind of lag everyone has experienced, the kind that normally doesn't matter. Except now, it mattered more than anything. He tapped the screen. Nothing. Tapped again. Still nothing. The app froze. Because somewhere in the background, his phone was doing something more important. Updating, buffering, processing. Doesn't matter. What matters is this. Software hesitated. Physics didn't. The door kept moving. Steady, heavy, unstoppable. Derek's smile disappeared. That shift. That moment when control leaves the room. He tried again. Harder. Faster. But panic is not an input the system recognizes. The command finally went through. Too late. Because momentum had already done its job. The garage door, hundreds of pounds of metal, made full contact. Dave didn't move. Didn't speak. Because there are moments where the brain just stops. Trying to catch up. Trying to understand how something so preventable just happened. Emergency responders arrived. Statements were made. Words like unfortunate malfunction were used. But again, let's be honest, nothing malfunctioned. The system worked exactly as designed. That was the problem. Derek built something with no safety net, and then trusted it completely. Because he believed control meant certainty. It doesn't. It just means responsibility. And when that control failed, even for a second, there was nothing left to save him. Dave later told people the same thing every time. He said he had total control. And that's the line that stuck. Because every story like this has one. That one sentence that sounds confident, right before everything proves it wrong. Derek wanted a smart home. He got one. It just wasn't smart enough to stop him. 10. The drone shot that cost everything. There's a moment every content creator reaches. That point where good enough stops being enough. Where normal shots feel boring, safe angles feel weak, and the only thing that matters is getting something no one else has. Marcus was at that point. Marcus wasn't a bad drone pilot. In fact, he was good. Steady hands, clean shots, a solid eye for composition. But like every creator chasing growth, he had a problem. Good content gets views. Risky content gets attention. And attention? That's addictive. So when Marcus found the location, he knew. This was it. An abandoned electrical pylon. Massive. Rust-covered. Standing alone in an open field like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. And above it, dark storm clouds rolling in. Wind picking up. The kind of atmosphere cinematographers dream about, and safety inspectors hate. His friend Liam looked at it, and immediately saw the problem. Maybe don't fly near that thing in a storm, he said, which is a perfectly reasonable sentence. Marcus laughed, because reasonable doesn't trend. This is perfect, he said. Raw energy, real atmosphere. And that's the phrase people use right before they ignore common sense. He launched the drone. The footage? Beautiful. Smooth tracking shots, wide cinematic sweeps, clouds moving like a time-lapse painting. For a moment, it was worth it. But then, the idea came. Because there's always one more shot. One angle that turns good into viral. I need a low angle, Marcus said, from the base. Now technically, you can get a low angle without physically climbing a metal tower during a storm. But Marcus didn't choose technical. He chose closer. He grabbed the structure, started climbing. One hand on the metal, one hand holding the controller, which already tells you everything you need to know. Because you can't focus on two things at once, especially when one of them can kill you. Liam shouted from below. Couldn't hear him. Wind was too loud. Or maybe Marcus just wasn't listening. Because once you commit to a shot, you stop hearing warnings. You only hear the version of yourself that says, just a little higher. He climbed. Higher. Higher. The drone hovered perfectly, waiting, recording. Because machines are very good at doing exactly what they're told, even when you shouldn't have told them anything. Marcus reached a crossbeam, stopped, looked down, then back at the drone, and smiled. Because from up there, everything looks under control. That illusion of mastery, the same one every story in this video shares. He turned slightly toward Liam and said, "See? Solid." Then, to prove it, he stomped his foot, hard, on the beam. Because nothing says, "This is safe," like testing it aggressively. The metal didn't break immediately. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it responded the way old structures do. Slow, tired, with a sound. A long, uncomfortable, metallic groan. The kind of sound that means, this has been a bad idea for a while. Marcus froze, for half a second, and that's when reality caught up. The rust gave way. Not explosively, just enough. The beam shifted, his footing disappeared. And now, for the first time, Marcus had no control. He reached for something. Anything. But old steel doesn't offer second chances. His grip slipped, The controller fell. The drone stayed. Because again, machines follow instructions. Humans make mistakes. He fell. Not fast at first. Just that brief moment of weightlessness. That disconnect. Where your brain tries to process what just happened and fails. Then gravity finished the sentence. Liam screamed. But sound doesn't travel fast enough to fix anything. The drone, still hovering, captured everything. Stable. Perfect. A cinematic, uninterrupted shot of a man falling out of frame. It kept recording because it had no reason to stop. Emergency services arrived. Statements were made. Words like tragic accident appeared again. But we already know this wasn't an accident. This was escalation. One decision, then another, then another. Each one feeling small. Each one feeling justified. Until suddenly, there's no way back. The footage was never released, but it didn't need to be, because the lesson is obvious. You don't need to see the fall to understand it. Marcus wanted the perfect shot, and in a way, he got it. Perfect framing, perfect lighting, perfect composition. Just one problem. He wasn't in it anymore. 10 stories, 10 different people, 10 completely different situations, and somehow, all the same ending. Not bad luck, not random accidents, but decisions. Small ones, stacked together, until there's no space left for survival instinct. That voice in your head, the one that says, maybe don't do this. That's not fear. That's experience you didn't earn yet. And every person in this video ignored it. So here's the real question. Not which story was the dumbest, not which one shocked you the most, but this. When was the last time you ignored that voice and got away with it? Because everyone has a moment like that. A decision that could have gone very differently. A situation where luck showed up instead of consequences. Drop it in the comments. Anonymous if you need to. No judgment, just data. And if nothing else, consider this video a reminder. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, especially not to an audience, because the moment you start performing instead of thinking, you stop being in control. And that's when reality steps in. Like, subscribe, and maybe